Welcome to the third Sunday of Advent. This is a Sunday of joy. We've talked about several other things which we'll remind you of in a little bit, but the third Sunday of Advent being joy, the candle is pink, and so I'm going to ask Austin to come up and light the candles. The third Sunday of Advent is about joy. The first two Sundays, we focused on some other things. It's been more contemplative, kind of inward looking. And we've considered hope and faith and how they build on each other. Hope is a wonderful thing to have. Without hope, life seems pointless. Keeping hope alive over time is sometimes quite a challenge. Depending on God for hope is a leap of faith that we choose to take if we follow Jesus Christ. Hebrews 11:1 tells us faith is confidence in what we hope for and the assurance of what we don't see. And the key in that is confidence in what we hope for and assurance of something we can't see physically, but we can see with our hearts and we can see with our spirits. To hope over time is another one of those challenges. It's a challenge of diminishing confidence, a challenge of being less and less assured of what our hope is all about. So where does joy come into that? Because the first two Sundays of Advent are not overly joyful. Well, joy is looking outward. The first two Sundays have been about looking inward, and joy now is the process of looking outward. It's an outward attitude that's felt by others because it shines through. Joy is not being happy all the time. It's an inner glow that others feel when they're around us, no matter what's going on in our lives. That inner glow is something that shines through because it's a light that comes from Jesus. It's really quite that simple. Check out what Paul says in the rest of Hebrews chapter 11. From verse 2 on, Paul talks about faith in God. Some things sometimes well and sometimes not so good in terms of the faith that people had, but he lists a whole bunch of people who had faith in something they never saw before they died. It's quite an amazing chapter when you want to talk about faith, and I encourage you to read it and check out all the names there, and then go back and read in the Old Testament about those names and their stories. And he lists many of them, from Cain and Enoch to Noah and Abraham. He lists Sarah and Isaac, Jacob, Esau, Joseph, Moses' parents, Moses, Rahab, who was not Jewish at all, and on into the history of Israel. And he lists all those folks as people who had hope and who had faith in that hope, but didn't get to the point of having the joy of that hope realized. It continued to be simply hope by the time that they died and went to the other side. At the end of chapter 11 of Hebrews, verses 39 and 40, Paul says as follows: "These folks were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, that only together with us would that be made perfect." In fact, speaking about Christmas. In other words, there's a whole bunch of folks who died without their hope being realized, yet they kept the faith. What had been promised? What were these folks waiting for? What hope did they have to wait for in faith? And where is that joy today? Where does it come from? On this third Sunday of Advent, we have joy because that hope, in fact, came true. And we know that. The hope was born as a baby to Mary and Joseph, named Jesus, Emmanuel, the Lord with us. We are called to go forward in joy with the example of those who've gone before as our encouragement. When we get discouraged, we can realize that there's a whole bunch of folks that are called a cloud of witness who show us what it means to wait and wait and wait. Check out how Paul talks about this in the next chapter of Hebrews chapter 12. And this is verse 1 to 3. "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let's throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith." And understand and listen here when joy gets brought into this. For the joy set before him, the joy set before Jesus, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of God on the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Jesus took great joy, not happiness, in the death and the resurrection that he experienced, and that's the joy that we talk about at Christmas. If you've had the honor to be alongside a Jesus believer when they're dying, you will know the meaning of that joy. You will have witnessed somebody crossing the doorway of death with the assurance that they're going to be with Jesus quite soon. That assurance is what we mean by joy. It's not joy in dying, because that's rarely an easy process and often quite difficult. It's not joy as in life is good and everybody is happy. It's not that either. It's a joy knowing what all folks in Hebrews 11 hope for in faith, and that they hope for came true at Christmas. That's the joy that we experience on this third Advent of 2020. It's a joy knowing soon they'll be with the child born at Christmas who became an adult and died and rose again. The knowing, the assurance that it's true is what takes folks through dying into life on the other side, and takes them through with joy and anticipation of what will come next. So on this Sunday, the third Sunday of Advent, I'd like to share with you two stories. They're Bible stories, and they're the stories of joy. The first comes from Luke chapter 1. When Mary found out what was going to happen, she fled to her relative Elizabeth. She wasn't feeling any joy about this pregnancy that she couldn't explain to anyone. When Mary found out what was going to happen, she ran away. When Liz first saw Mary, she immediately began to celebrate. She'd become pregnant at a time when she didn't think it was at all possible for her. She had her own miracle growing inside of her. When she saw Mary, she said, "As soon as the sound of your greeting reached my ears," and for anybody who is not sure about when life starts in the womb, pay attention to this. As soon as the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the baby in my womb leaped for joy. And so if we think that children aren't children before they're born, the Bible tells us quite a bit different there, and that's from Luke 1, verse 44. A child yet to be born responded to another child also yet to be born. Two children, soon to see the light of day, found reasons for hope, and their mothers experienced that joy because a child leaped in the womb of one of them. Mary, hearing what her cousin Liz had said, started singing, and up until now we've got no record of Mary being very happy about what had gone on. She'd accepted it, but wasn't full of any happiness, and certainly there's no sign of joy. And she says as follows, "My soul glorifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior." And when you think about those are words of joy, because somebody else shared their joy, somebody else believed her, because children in their womb communicated with their mothers and with each other. Mary could now have joy, not because she was happy with her circumstances, but she knew some of the truth about who her baby was. A couple of unborn babies, and one leapt for joy. Two mothers, lots of reasons to be unhappy, and lots of reasons to be sad, finding reasons for joy. They knew the faith of their ancestors was becoming a reality, and both of them were happy about that, and they sang. That's one of the stories of joy on this third Advent of Christmas. The second story of joy comes in the next chapter of Luke chapter 2, and this is what it says. Some of the folks, easy to overlook, and we mean shepherds, spending their time in the hills looking for sheep, were treated to a concert of heavenly voices, and that's quite literal. They were treated to a choir of heavenly voices. A bunch of angels showed up praising God and singing, and one of the angels spoke to them and said as follows, "I bring you good news that will cause great joy for the people. Today in the town of David a Savior has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign to you. You will find a baby wrapped in clothes and lying in a manger. I bring you great news that will cause great joy for all the people." Another story of what joy means. The shepherds went to see if it was true, and when they found out it was, they left, and they couldn't help but tell the story to everybody they met. It wasn't possible to keep it to themselves. And I don't think it's any surprise that God chose those who suffer and those on the fringes of society to be the first messengers of joy. After all, who knows more about joy than those who suffer sadness and suffering? So just a thought to conclude today. It's really quite simple, yet often difficult to put into practice. The story of joy is worth telling. And it's not just worth telling, it's worth telling with all of our life experience behind it. Everything we go through, sad or happy, good or bad, nice, perhaps ugly, all that experience gives depth to the joy we can share if we choose to share the story of the real Christmas. The story is one of joy because a baby was born. The baby born who was spoken of hundreds of years before. The story is one of joy because we're part of the story. The story is one of joy because we're not always happy and cheerful. Does that sound strange? And I hope it doesn't. Joy is about all of us who are coming to Jesus and saying, we have joy in you, and maybe in nothing else, but in you we do have that joy. We sing the words of the hymn, Joy to the World, the Lord has come, let heaven and earth rejoice. And I think we need to mean those words. This third Advent of Christmas, 2020, I leave you with better words than I can craft. They're the words of a song that were the favorites of my mother and my father who is very close to death today. And I'm not going to sing these words, but I'm going to say these words as a prayer for him and a prayer to him and maybe a prayer from him to you. And it's one that was sung often by George Beverly Shea, my father's favorite singer. And it's His Eye is on the Sparrow. Why should I feel discouraged? Why should the shadows come? Why should my heart be lonely and long for heaven and home when Jesus is my portion, my constant friend is He. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free, for His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. When I play music for my dad and he is not responding, he seems to respond to music even this morning. The song goes on, let not your heart be troubled, His tender words I hear, and resting on His goodness I lose my doubts and fears. Though by the path He leadeth, for one step I may see His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. And I'm just going to leave you with these words. I sing because I'm happy, and I sing because I'm full of joy. I sing because I'm free, because Jesus died for me, and He rose again. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. The Lord be with you, and have a special week.